Here goes. Hi, Steve. This is Ann Ferguson, and I am talking to Steve Alves, who is here with us at the Rattlesnake Gutter Festival Co-op Telethon, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about his film, Food for Change. But first, I wanted to say that he's a pretty well-known filmmaker. He went to USC Film School. He worked in Hollywood and New York City. And then, Steve, how did you get out to here, to the Valley?
Ah, I was a freelance film editor for about 10 years before I became a producer and maker of my own films. And I was, discovered by a filmmaker in New York City, mutual friend, who recommended me to work for Florentine Films, which was a company that Ken Burns had just started. He was making his first film called The Brooklyn Bridge. And we were all young people, young filmmakers, very energetic. I saw what was going on there, the type of films, the quality of films they were making. And I thought, this is wonderful. And I also saw the Valley and how beautiful it was and what a balance you had of working and living and being outside and close to meadows and fields and beauty. And I thought, this is where I belong and I want to live here. It wasn't just a career I wanted a full life. So I weaned myself away from editing in New York, and then I started my own company and hung out a shingle, and I've been, making films ever since.
I hear that the co-op that you were involved with, and a lot of the film is about the Greenfields Market. Actually, it was Suzette Snowcob who maybe mentioned to you doing a film about Food for Change. Is that right?
It is, in fact, Suzette, my dear friend. Yep,
Well,
she mentioned it in passing, and I heard it, and I thought, oh, that sounds like a good thing to do. And then I did the research, and I realized the small film that she had in mind and the other managers at the time was really a fabulous American story that nobody had really wrapped their head around and told. Cooperatives in America. It's a vehicle to tell the counterpoint, which is non-cooperatives, which is megalopolies and monopolies and oligarchy. All those things could be formed into a very beautiful story, positive story, by talking about cooperation.
and
And
you've really done that here in this film. And by the way, Suzette Snowcob is also worked at our Leverett Food Co-op, who's doing this fundraiser today. And we will have her talking a little bit after our interview and our watching of your film. But let's just start with your film. And my idea is we'll do the first 15 minutes or so of your film, and then I'll ask you a few questions, and then we'll segue to a next little clip from your film, if that's okay with you.
yes, just want to mention before we show the clip, and I know the clip you're going to show, it comes in about 3 minutes into the film. So there's an introduction before it.
Okay.
With that in mind, this is where the official story begins.
Okay, so yeah, and let me just say, by the way, that you should. I'm now sharing the screen. I hope this is working. You should check out Steve Alves' complete film, Food for Change, that we really don't have time to play today, at the YouTube link I've shown on the screen. And he also has a wonderful website, www.foodforchange.coop, and you can go there. And we'll talk a little bit later about his wonderful latest entry into entertainment, The Ballad of 45 in the Outhouse, about Trump and our current situation. And there's the link there. And I'll play this again, but let's go straight to the film right now, first clip.
A good place to begin to change the structure of how we do business is to examine the way we grow and sell food, an activity that has changed more in the past 50 years than it has in the past 10,000. This system, now dominated by large corporations, uses enormous amounts of energy and toxic chemicals while creating an array of environmental problems. Companies that experiment with the basic elements of life, with the goal to control the world's food supply, from the gene to the grocery shelf, promoting a variety of food-like substances for the whole family. The selling of food is also controlled by fewer and fewer large supermarket chains. This system is designed for efficiency, to produce cheap food and reap one major product, maximum profits.
You take the top 10 retailers in the United States and they scoop up, so huge amount of the food business that is going. And those monopolies are controlling all of the aspects of the distribution system to the detriment of all of the farmers, the pollution. And that is all a system that brings employment opportunities down, it brings income opportunities down, it really stretches all parts of our society.
Our industrialized food system, intended to promote competition, looks more like central planning, which is the reason we opposed other systems. So that wouldn't happen here.
People have less in their pockets than they used to. They have less savings for the future. The future looks bleak for the majority of Americans. As a result, we have a race to the bottom. And what cooperatives are is a means of raising everybody to the top.
Moving away from a monopoly-controlled system to one that strengthens communities and protects the environment is the reason I joined a food cooperative. My co-op, located on Main Street in Greenfield, Massachusetts, is one of over 300 food cooperatives across the country, each one owned by people who want good food and who care about how it's grown and the people who grow it.
This year, we're expanding our business offices.
It's democracy in action at the local level, where it can have a big effect, which makes me wonder why it hasn't caught on more, and how during the last 3 decades, giant corporate-owned supermarkets managed to gain control of over 80% of all U.S. food sales, while the cooperative share is less than 0.5%. To find out the answer, I had to go back in time to learn what forces were at work beyond what I was seeing. The first thing I learned is that co-ops began in the early 19th century. They were started by English weavers who were forced into servile labor under a new industrial system.
They were people who said, we want to be in control of the mechanism whereby we feed ourselves. The idea of cooperation will be better for us in the long run, and we will not need charity if we're able to succeed in self-help.
They saved what little wages they earned and opened the first food cooperative, selling flour, oatmeal, and candles. Their idea of open membership and selling wholesome food is the legacy we follow 170 years later. By going back, I hope to learn the differences between competitive and cooperative systems, businesses that want to dominate, in contrast to those that seek trusting relationships. This is the kind of business the folks who started my co-op wanted, and a place to buy tofu turkey. But in order to understand the challenges of developing a society based on cooperation, I had to move away from Main Street to a different era and another American street. To a time when 1% of the population owns 40% of the nation's wealth. 200 corporations control half of all American industries. Leaders tout the virtues of individualism and free enterprise, while the vast majority have few opportunities to improve their lives. Reckless, unregulated credit schemes create a mountain of debt. Inflation soars, consumer spending plummets, and the bubble bursts.
For me, what's at stake with the co-ops is ultimately about a new way of organizing society. Our economic system is set up in such a way that really is unjust, and without other explanation, it just really is not a just society, because it really favors the concentration of wealth. It really harkens back to the founders of our own co-op. Wanting to create an alternative economic system was one of the driving factors of what they were doing 40 years ago. We may not look like what they envisioned, because we changed to stay in business, but what drives my motivation is that we're building a society that has the goal of no exploitation in it. And that's really, I think, at the root of what the co-op business model is. It's really taking democracy and bringing it into an economic environment.
Following the stock market crash of 1929, President Herbert Hoover assures the nation that a minor quirk has occurred in an otherwise sound economic system. His claim that a return to prosperity is just around the corner is a stark contrast to reality. As hard times spread, an increasing number hold but one limited aspiration: survival.
It's impossible for me to get a job anywhere. Nobody want to hire me out, and the only help that I have at all is $2 a week on federal relief.
The Depression takes away people's livelihoods, and with them, their dignity and sense of self-worth. By 1933, 13 million Americans have lost their jobs. 10,000 banks have failed. 25% of the population is unemployed, while another 25%, though counting themselves lucky to have work, suffered deep cuts in wages. People who had lived productive lives find themselves and their families living hand to mouth, or worse, tossed to the streets to beg for food.
The poor and unfortunates like myself on State Street are begging for a bowl of soup and for a sandwich. We haven't got no work. We can't get no work. We're looking for work. We can't get no work, but we will by someday in the future.
As winter descends on Chicago in 1932, hungry, cold, and jobless citizens tear up the wood-paved streets in a desperate attempt to heat their homes. For those who do work, low wages bring mounting confrontations between management and labor. Within a 3-year span, 10,000 strikes erupt across the country. Hired company agents work with the police to overpower protesters. Responding to the urgency of the situation, the federal government starts work programs.
This is no unsolvable problem if we face it wisely and courageously. It can be accomplished in part by direct recruiting by the government itself. Our greatest primary task is to put people to work.
President Franklin Roosevelt's Works Progress Administration builds railroads, parks, and other public facilities. But recovery is slow and has numerous critics.
The cost of the New Deal threatens to exceed that of the Great War. The folly and waste must be cut out of this expenditure and the federal government budget balanced, or we shall see one of 3 horsemen ravage this land: taxation, or repudiation, or inflation.
Work programs are cut, declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Unemployment remains stubbornly high, and the Great Depression continues.
Come on, you good time people.
While discord ripples across the countryside, a movement swells without fanfare in the Midwest. People hit by hard times come together to share their problems, then decide to take matters into their own hands. For them, the solution is in a system that emphasizes cooperation instead of competition, through democratically run, collectively owned, independent businesses. Convinced of the simple, practical wisdom of their approach, they labor for over a decade to make it work. then set out to tell their fellow Americans what they have learned. The middle path between capitalism and socialism is the way out of the Depression. Cooperative economies, they believe, promise a more stable future, led by consumers and strengthened with each purchase. By 1938, 15 regional warehouses are supplying hundreds of co-op grocery stores. Within the co-op system, farmers, free from the control of large corporations, begin to get a fair price for their labor. As their power increases, they branch out into manufacturing their own equipment. In Columbus, Ohio, cooperatives start their own department store, which grows to 8 regional stores. Investors in these businesses come not from Wall Street, but from the Consumers Cooperative Association, with 125,000 members in 9 states. Through these efforts, co-ops see a 17% increase in employment. This new method of wealth creation begins to grow exponentially as people who work in co-op businesses deposit their checks in cooperatively run banks, which in turn invest in cooperatively run businesses. Most impressive of all are co-ops' efforts to disrupt big business monopolies by drilling, pumping, and refining their own oil, selling gasoline in over 2,000 service stations in 9 states. As the co-op model proves effective, there seems to be no limit on its challenge to corporate control.
So, Steve, that was really moving, and in fact, I've seen this film a number of times, but I was just hit by those scenes from the Depression and in the 30s, and wondering about the pandemic and its effect today, and how you might connect that whole message of that part that the 30s and early 40s co-op movements were trying to promote, that there's a middle way to solve some of the problems our mainstream food system is having between capitalism and communism. And just seeing those workers and thinking about our frontline workers with the pandemic and our food workers and so on, and the problems we're having today. Do you see, could you say a little bit more about how you feel that the food system is failing us, and how the resurgence of the food cult movement might be an answer?
Yes, certainly. A cooperative commonwealth, as envisioned by people back in the 30s, obviously did not become the norm in society. In fact, post-World War II, we really went off the rails, which was the beginning of the consolidation of major industries again, even though the lessons of the Great Depression were not learned. One of the industries more than any that has been consolidated is the food industry. Even in the last 20 years, there's been a gobbling up of the smaller markets by the gargantuan markets. This really gets to the core of what is most vulnerable about our food system, our economy in general, but everybody eats, everybody needs food. The consolidation of food is based on efficiencies. Efficiencies mean things have to move in a streamline between a producer, a distributor, the buyer of the entity, in this case, large corporations. And that system, as we have learned through the pandemic, is extremely fragile. We've always suspected the fragility in it, but now we're seeing real evidence. Minnesota Department of Agriculture releasing information on the slaughter of at least 10,000 hogs a week, because they can't get them into market because of the pandemic, because the way the ordering of that and what's next in line and the next hogs that are coming down the line and how the whole thing works is if they don't have a place to go, they have to just be simply annihilated and ground into compost. You're also seeing monoculture crops that are having a similar effect. But essentially, the pandemic has shown that what we in the sort of local food movement, cooperative movement, CSAs, all these things that I think really represent who we are as people who live in Western Massachusetts as part of, I think, our core history and identity, is those principles were always correct. We need stability and we need diversification. We need multiple ways of getting product to market. And we need to support things that allow soil to remain healthy and that give funds to young people who want to make a go of farming. And cooperatives are a very key ingredient in this whole thing. We've seen the strength and growth of cooperatives in the years, since my co-op, the one I go to and shop at. Of course, I've been to the Leverett co-op. It's beautiful. I love to go there and sit and have lunch, and I always run into people I know wherever I go. So it's those chance occurrences that are also just a wonderful part of living in the Valley. So, it's an important part because it holds a bulwark, against this fierce onslaught that we're facing. And the idea of, consumers, which on one can I save 30 cents on an item? Can I do this? Those monies that are saved are really built in, usually with exploitation in mind and the fragility too. So, you're buying resilience when you shop at a co-op. You're buying familiarity and you're buying knowledge of where your food comes from. So that's the course I like to think that we're on. Climate change is another thing. The amount of carbon that's being thrown into the air as we speak through the monoculture, corn, soybeans, things like that, basically growing things in dead soil, is a really big factor too. We need to grow the growing food movement.
That's wonderful, Steve. I mean, I totally agree with you. And I'd like to now show a brief clip from our beloved Susie Palucci, who worked, was one of the founders of the Montague Co-op that then turned into your Greenfield Market Franklin County Co-op, and then she also worked in our food co-op. But let me just let her speak for herself, and then we'll talk about her and what that means and what she means for us. Let's see.
I thought, how can I be involved in some kind of social change situation that everybody needs? And I thought, aha, voila, food. Everybody needs food. Church ladies, the farmers, the hippies. And so I thought, oh, this is cool. We can do this. I thought it would be so simple, but when I got into it, I realized, even with something as simple as food, everybody had a different idea about it. Some people wanted it to be a church, some wanted it to be a daycare center, some wanted it to be a political alternative, some wanted it to be an educational thing. We used to have, I'm talking all-night meetings about whether or not the co-op should carry pet food. That's something that we want. We just want people food. And what do you mean? My cat is a person, and oh my God. The board was sort of the manager, and everybody was in on the decision making, and even though it was still small, it was cumbersome. It's one thing to make your own mistakes in your life and pay the consequences, but what if you make a decision for a community store and blow it? Then you've just lost everybody's money and hard work and their trust, and it felt really scary, in that we still didn't exactly know how to run a grocery store.
10 years after the Montague Co-op began selling whole grain foods out of someone's apartment, members take a bold leap of faith to revive their frail economic venture by changing locations. But unable to pay Main Street rents, the best they can do is to find a place on a side street. They also changed the co-op's name to display a more regional appeal.
Business started increasing immediately the moment we moved to Greenfield. The store had more products in it, started adding a couple of employees.
Sales just went up, whatever, 50, 60, 70%. It was like, oh my gosh, but trying to ride this beast, what do we do now? We got to come up with new systems to be able to have more employees and more keys, and who's going to schedule these cashiers, and what happens when somebody's sick. And the ordering became more complex.
Some people thought getting bigger was getting badder. It meant more impersonal, more profit, and there were other people who said, what's wrong with profit? As long as we share it amongst each other. What's wrong with getting bigger? We'll have more jobs, more food, more everything. And other people said, we'll lose our sense of community. Through that process, we had managers who quit, we had workers who quit, we had board presidents quit.
There came a time where they had to let me go. And I just thought, you dirty rats, after all I've done for you. And so there was my part-time job, there was my income. Well, I didn't come in here for 2 years because I was so mad. Because in the end, really, I couldn't run a multi-million-dollar grocery store. I'm a clown. I mean, financial things are getting so complicated. I couldn't figure this out. What I've made meaning out of this is that there's a part that different kinds of people play in an organization. And I see myself as an overthruster, a person that comes in with a blast of energy, can see certain things. We got to get to Greenfield. Let's go. We're going to get some land. That's it. And then there's the people that are going to put their head in one of many available yokes and pull for the long term of our, mortgages and financial statements and personnel policies. And a lot of time the overthruster, more visionary people got to go because they're not going to stay there for the steady pull of it. And I thought it was meant that I wasn't valued and I wasn't needed, but I was needed for that part of it. And then other types of people are needed for the other parts of it, which they really have talent and time and skill that I didn't have.
I just thought, I think Susie is so wonderful, and I've known her, I knew her for so long. I wondered if you could say a little bit about how you felt that she was, sort of an inspiration for our local food co-ops in that whole countercultural movement out of which this new wave of food cooperatives came.
Sure. I mean, I love Susie, and I miss her. And she was part of the extended family of friends that I have in the Valley. And I knew her, from a distance until I started the film. And then what I always do is I decide who are the principal players that I'd like to consider interviewing. And then I come to their house or I meet them somewhere and I chat. And when I sat down and I talked to Susie, I realized not only is she amusing and charming individual, but she's really smart. Susie knows a lot. And in my pre-interview with Susie, I learned so much about the food system, the historical backdrop of the co-op. She knew what she was working and she was giving herself so much to the film. And, it was a whole hour of material. I sat with her when we finally sat down and did the interview. And it was just so engaging and wonderful to interview her. And then to see that this film has been shown throughout the United States and in different countries as well, hundreds of screenings. And to see when Susie comes on, there's an immediate response from the audience. Big theaters, hundreds of people, she starts talking and the theater gets quiet and they laugh at her and they find her totally engaging, which I find is just a great legacy that Susie, without the costuming, just being Susie and talking is alive and well in this world that this film continues to screen in so many locations, colleges and universities as well. And Susie is saying in that last clip that you showed, such important information for anybody that gets involved in any kind of social change movement.
Yeah.
That you may feel burned. A lot of people feel burned and that's it. They resent the whole organization and they don't know how to move through it. Yeah. Susie wrestled with the whole concept and she came out on top. And that to me is the wonderful universal idea that I'm thinking young people today that are seeing this film, so many of them are activists, my daughter is one of them, they can learn from her. And I don't know, I'm just so happy that she's in the film.
You know, and I also think, you know, Susie was, you know, a homespun philosopher. She was this actress. She was such a communicator. I mean, laughter makes you, you know, unifies you to people. And she lived with me, actually. She was a tenant of mine. She was a gardener, so she grew local food. She, and she says at the end of that clip, oh, you know, I couldn't go into that store for 2 years. And then I realized, well, you know, they did value me for the time that I was needed. And then other types were needed to carry on the work. And she did. She came to the Leverett Food Co-op. She did baking there. She brought her flowers to sell. So she went from leadership to just working as a staff person, but just working as a staff person, without the staff people, you know, the co-ops wouldn't survive. You know, we're all a community. And so she just gave this great example herself of, you know, being able to communicate to people, creating these original plays that she did on all sorts of issues. She worked with the Quabbin Mediation Center and did a play about the brain and different parts of the brain. She was opposed to the nuclear power plant at Vermont Yankee and did a skit about that. All of this was for free, just giving to the community and trying to create that community to make a better world. And that's what all of us in the co-op movement are doing. And all of us who've been on boards or, you know, worked as volunteers, been members in members meetings, know that there's divisions and we disagree, and it's really hard sometimes to be competing with the big box stores, and so you're almost going broke, and then how do we get out of this? And you know, Susie's an inspiration. We find a way. You know, there are different things that different types of people can do in a team, as long as we understand that consensus and some kind of really understanding the importance that each of us have to contribute is where we go from here. So anyway, thank you so much, Steve, and I do hope that you will participate in our event, which is coming up, which will happen after we speak, and Suzette Snow-Cobb will be coming on and talking a little bit about the NFCA, the Neighboring Food Co-op Association, which she's now a staff member for, which is the regional group of co-ops that we're a part of, the Leverett Food Co-op. And I hope that everybody will see your film, and if they haven't seen it, and will look at your new project. Can you tell us just a word about that? The Ballad of...
Oh, yeah, well, I'm also a musician, and a friend of mine who animated a lot of my films called me up and said, you know, I'm willing to do some free animation for any projects you have that are nonprofit. So I thought, oh, there's a song I always wanted to write. Based on a Blind Blake song called in the jailhouse, excuse me.
Yeah.
And I knew I could do the lyrics and make it updated for our current situation. So I did, and he did fabulous animation to it, and all the reviews from people, it just put it up on YouTube a couple of days ago. The reviews are great, and I think of it as a get out the vote video. Both educational and entertaining. And if people like it, I ask them to share it and use it as a tool to help us get out of the outhouse. That's what we're in right now.
Yeah. Well, Steve, we have to go. Let me just see if I can share that screen again. Your information about your song, so people, the new Ballad of 45 in the Outhouse. It's wonderful, it's funny, and it's very telling, and it will hopefully get out the vote. And then we, and I hope you will watch later in the day. We will be having our auction, and this is the fundraising part of our telethon, and we really hope that you'll participate. And thanks again, Steve, and hope you are able to participate as a watcher in the rest of our telethon.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.